We'll fill them up so that people don't have to stand. Thanks.
Well, I won't tell you what you might
Landscape.
Hey, Justin.
You got this.
Justin, Marilyn give you the pie.
It was on Facebook.
You see it on Facebook?
Oh, no, I don't do Facebook much.
I heard there was pie.
Oh, we were high out.
We did against that. Or Justin. I did.
Thank you all for coming tonight. We are going to have a discussion about the referendum that's going to be on the ballot next month, as you're all aware. Okay. Oh, I am the president of AAUW Tillamook, and so all the refreshments are being brought to you by AAUW, the American Association of University Women, and we're co-hosting with the Headlight Herald, and they are live streaming right now on their Facebook page, and then after tonight they'll keep it on their Facebook page until after the election, after the ballots are sent out. If you have questions, we've put cards on your chairs, and we have two runners. So Doris, raise your hand, please. Doris is for the West Side group. Anytime you have a question, you've written it down, just wake it up. You can have questions now. You can have them during the presentation. You can have them during the question and answer time. And Doris will make sure I get them over here. And over on the east side, we have Dion Bacon. Dion, and she will bring you extra cards, and they each have one pen, so if you don't have a pen, she may be able to loan one to you. So please bring questions as much as you can.
Is the Headlight Herald going to allow conservatives to come in on the Facebook page? Because I've been blocked.
I don't know if they will or not. I want to thank our panel tonight. So we have Lowton Hooley, who works at, owns Rosenberg's hardware store. We have Adam Schwend, who is the president of the real estate board here in Tillamook County. We have Aaron Scarr, who is the executive director of CARE. And we have Bill Bartline, who is one of our commissioners. So I thank all of you for being here. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about the agenda, just briefly. There has been a housing study that's been done over the last couple of years, and Aaron and Adam have both been on the team that has helped with this study. It was done by an outside organization, but they both were on the task force for that. Aaron's going to give the presentation of the housing study, and that'll take probably 15 or 20 minutes. And then I'm going to give just a few-minute presentation on the referendum. And we have put a copy of the referendum on most of the chairs, and if you need one, your question runners might be able to get one for you. Just a note I want to make. So there is amendments to this ordinance on page 2, and what's kind of missing there is the fact that numbers 1 through 8 are exemptions. So it lists them here, but they just forgot to say these are exemptions to the tax, and we'll talk about that. Okay, so we have 2 PACs here tonight. The Citizens for Equitable Housing include Adam and Lowton, and Friends for Workforce Housing include Aaron and Bill, and some other folks, I think, as well. I would like you to write your questions. We're going to take all of our questions via written on your card. You can have as many cards as you want, just let your runners know, and anytime, and you can they'll bring them up to me. And after the presenters each have 3 minutes to talk about their perspective for or against this referendum, then we'll have the question and answer time, and each person will have 1 minute to answer any of all the questions. So, I mean, we'll have one question, they'll each get 1 minute to answer for themselves. Any questions? I mean, okay. All right. We're going to start with Aaron giving the housing study presentation. Thank you.
You want that side of the way, right?
Unless you want it on your face.
Would you pull the screen down, Adam, if you don't mind, please?
Well,
Maybe.
Okay,
lights.
okay. Oh, and we don't have a clicker. Can you be my clicker?
I can be a click. What do I need to click?
It'll just be the forward arrow. Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay. Well, good evening. I'm glad you guys are all here. This is a great topic of conversation for our community. And what Adam and I hope to give you as the lead off is just some good information that the housing study brought forth for us to think about. Okay? So Adam and I were both on the housing task force. It was established in October of 2015 to look at housing conditions in our community. The task force really wanted to take a look at not only what kinds of housing we had and what we needed, but also why was the market not stepping up to do this? Because of course we like to think that the free market will solve sort of these kinds of issues. If there's demand, we would increase supply, and that wasn't happening in our community. So part of our study was to look at why is that the case? And then we also wanted a consultant that could give us recommendations. So not only would we know why this is happening, but we would have some potential solutions. And that's what we're going to present to you in the housing study, is what our consultants basically said was going on and what we ought to do about it, okay? So what our consultants basically came and said is, what's happening is Tillamook has been found. We used to be kind of a nice little community tucked away on the coast. There were a certain amount of tourists who knew about us, but not an overwhelming amount. That has changed. We've now been found. This is the place to be and the place to have some housing. So I'm going to go really fast because normally this takes about 30 minutes. So forgive me if it feels like I'm rushing, okay? So they came up and said, there's 4 things that are really driving the challenge in your housing market. Said low wages. Your economy currently is based far more on your tourism industry and less on jobs that are paying more. So you've got some issues there. Low standards in much of our housing stock. So we have some stock in our communities that's older stock. There's quite a bit of it that's of low standard right now. We have very few options in our community. Home as a young family, you think this is going to be great. It's my first home and then I will move to my next home. We're finding that the housing stock is so limited, we don't have that mobility. We also don't have that mobility for some of our seniors who they've raised their children, they have their home, they'd like to downsize, but they can't because there's just not another house they can go to that meets their needs. We're just kind of stuck with that. And then we have a low amount of developable land, which is one of the key factors that makes it difficult for the market to adjust and solve this. And this has to do a lot with our the geography of our county. There are lots of areas that could be developed, but it would be very expensive because of the landslide issues, the steep slopes. There's lots of things that make it harder to develop. And we have all of those in Tillamook County. We have floodplains. You could keep listing lots of reasons why it's difficult. Okay? So those are the 4 key things. We're going to look at those in a little more detail.
And I might say also,
Yes.
in terms of the developable land, one of the restrictions that we have, particularly in Oregon, is Oregon's very unique land use plan. There's a lot of resource land, a lot of land that would otherwise be developable, but because it's its own resource land, the state's not so apt to move that out of resource land. that's another challenge in terms of development land.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about wages, because one of the things that they pointed out to us is that our economy in Tillamook County is largely based on jobs that are paying $12 to $15 an hour. Those are our tourism-related jobs, and actually many of our other jobs as well. 12 to 15 is a pretty large chunk of what people make in our area. The housing in our area, in terms of its affordability, is based on something closer to about a $23 to $27 an hour wage. So there's this big gap, and that's what we're feeling in terms of workforce housing. The housing that's out there that is available, you need to make more money to afford it, okay? And what we're seeing happen is a lot of the folks in our community are paying more for housing than they can really afford. So that's called being housing cost burdened, and that's when you're paying more than 30% of your income for housing. So when that happens, you then don't have the income you need for the rest of the things in your life, such as food, transportation, medical care, entertainment. The opportunity to fully participate in the economy isn't there for these folks because they're paying so much for housing. We're also seeing people who simply can't find the housing, okay? So what this slide is really talking about, this is a key piece to why it feels like it's gotten tighter and tighter, and it's because it has. So if you look in the year 2000 at the number of people that were housing cost burdened by their income amount, okay? Up here we expect this top line. These are folks that are living on Social Security or disability who are making $20,000 a year or less, okay? That's not uncommon for them to be housing cost burdened. It's not good, but it's not uncommon. In the year 2000, 77.7% of those folks making $20,000 were housing cost burdened. As we move forward through time to 2014, you see that now 92% of them are housing cost burdened. Took a pretty good rise. Again, it's not that we don't expect that. It's unfortunate, but it's reality. This right here is the line that I think tells an awful lot of the story of what has changed in Tillamook County that we're all feeling in this crunch. So in 2000, 25% of people who were making between $9.61 and $16.83 an hour. That's $16.83 in
Where were
Tillamook
these
County.
jobs at?
These are your
You
retail
know what the minimum wage
jobs.
was in 2000? It
So-
wasn't
so we're not-
$9.61.
So
We're going to take all questions written, not.
the other part of that is there are an awful lot of people in our community who are not able to work full-time. They don't work year-round
That don't
because
change
those
the
jobs
minimum
don't exist year-round. So their minimum wage, what they're making per hour, is essentially less. But the point is that we had a huge jump right here. Because people have said, you know, it was always kind of hard to find housing, but nothing like it is now. We have a huge jump. The folks who are in this range, making $20,000 to $35,000 a year, we now have 7 out of 10 of those folks are housing cost burdened. Okay, our housing pricing is going up faster than our wages. And that was one of the key pieces that the consultant said, you know, you want to look at this. This is why it's starting to hurt more. And in terms of buying a home, what your bank generally wants is a 3-to-1 ratio in terms of you should be buying a house that's 3 times what your income is. Okay, and that's sort of a standard piece. When you look at affordability for purchase, and you look at some different communities, you can see in Boise it's 3.6 to 1, so you could probably still afford a reasonable house there. Jumping to the top up here, Hermosa Beach, 9.8 to 1, very unaffordable. So if you look at Tillamook in the middle, 5.2 to 1, okay? That just means it's very difficult to buy a home because it's hard to get finance to buy a home because the bank wants you at 3 to 1 and you're 5 to 1, okay? So that's part of the story. Part of the story is that our housing has become very unaffordable. The other part of the story is that we are seeing a shift, and we're seeing a shift from full-time housing units to part-time housing units, meaning vacation rentals and second homes. Okay, and it is, again, impacting the amount of housing available in our communities. So when you took a look in 2009, there were a total of 17,700 homes. Jump up to 2014, now there's 18,419. We've increased all units by 719 units. So things were being built in that period. We increased by 719 units. But the other piece to that story is that when you take a look, our owner-occupied housing dropped by 409 units in that same window of time. Our owner-occupied housing didn't all burn down or blow away. It was transferred over to second home and vacation home stock, okay? Renter housing dropped by 251 units in that same window of time, transferred over to second home and vacation home stock. So that's another part of our puzzle here in Tillamook County, is that we are seeing an increase, which again, I think we all know. I don't think that surprises anybody. But it is a key piece to what's causing the lack of affordability and lack of availability of housing for us at this time. You want to say anything? Jump in anytime you do.
Not right now, but I will
Okay.
later, don't you worry.
Okay. One of the things we want to make sure is we're here to talk about, what is the answer, but we both were a part of coming up with, where's our challenge? What's happening here? And we want to make sure we have equal time. So what we've discovered, our consultants discovered, is we have two housing markets currently on the coast. We have an active housing market along the coast where houses are being bought and sold and built, and that is largely the higher cost homes. Now that mine's not perfect. There are some communities that you might wish it went like this, but that's generally the concept. Over here on the backside in the inland market, we have a lot less movement in our market, fewer homes bought, sold, and built. And that's where we start to see that housing stock that's starting to deteriorate. Okay, we're starting to see housing that folks don't make enough to maintain their home the way that they would like to. So we start to see some deterioration in our housing stock, which is also part of our challenge. So, quick summary. Local low wages, so we have a housing market where people are earning this, but the cost of a housing is this, okay? Low standards, we have housing that is starting to deteriorate, but there isn't money to fix it back up. And people are stuck in that housing because there's not a lot of mobility. There's not the chance to move where you'd like to. And the low amount of land.
So if you've got all this figured out, what do we need a consultant?
So for what we have is we have these two markets. We have scarcity of affordable units, and it's what the consultants essentially called a stuck market. They said it's, in terms of what are the problems here, you're stuck. You can't afford to build more. People can't afford what it costs to build more. And what you have, people are stuck in it. They don't have money to move. So you've got a stuck market. Okay, technical term, right? So then the question is, okay, so what do we do about that? That's lovely. Now we know we're here. What do we do about that? Next. Okay, recommendations. So they came up with 10 recommendations. We're not going to go through them all. And we're going to go through them again, the ones that we do fairly quickly. We're going to stay over here on the green side because these were the recommendations. They said start here. Okay, these are the things that they recommend we do first. These are the long-term goals that we should be working toward in our housing market. Okay, they said none of this is going to happen overnight. It's not going to be fast. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be a heavy lift for the community to get this work done. If it were easy, it would have already happened. Okay.
I think it's also worth noting some of these are actually not possible.
Yeah.
For example, the transfer of development rights is a very, I won't get into explaining it, but I think there's just a pilot program starting in Oregon. It would not be a possibility, nor would it really be effective in this. So I think it was an idea that was just thrown out there as a kind of a last thing. But there are some things in here that are more doable than others.
I would agree, definitely. Okay, so let's go forward.
Oh, you want
Ready?
more? Okay.
One more, because then you can actually read it. I know that last slide was difficult. It's a little tiny print. So the first thing that they recommend is that there be a housing coordinator that is a county-wide position. This is a county-wide problem. It does not exist in just one city or one community. It is all across our county. Their recommendation was that we have someone who has expertise and capacity to bring housing deals together using the complex tools that are available through the state and federal governments, that this person has expertise in zoning and planning, so that this person can help create a streamlined pathway through the planning department for workforce housing. Okay, so that was their first thing, is you gotta have somebody whose job this is, and I definitely feel like that's been one of the challenges we've had in Tillamook County, is that it's nobody's job to make sure workforce housing gets built, okay? And so there was a missing there. We have a housing authority and we have a nonprofit housing developer that are 3 county bodies for Columbia, Clatsop, and Tillamook. They do not have the capacity to bring to Tillamook for us. The nonprofit developer happens to be stationed in Columbia, the housing authority is stationed in Clatsop, and guess what? They get a lot more housing built than we do, because they use that expertise on the ground where they are. There is no expertise on the ground here. So that was something that definitely came up, is we gotta have somebody who's a champion for this. The task force is a great jumping off point, but none of us have time to be the person that pulls that all together.
And I think in all of these recommendations, it's important to note that these are recommendations that they happen. There are no recommendations of how to do it.
Absolutely.
Or where it's funded from, or anything like that. These are just recommendations that you should do this. How we do it is going to be unique, I think, to every community. So I think it's important to note as well.
Yes.
Next, or you did.
Next. Okay, good. They suggested an adoption of this housing plan, mostly as an agreement that as a county, we are on board, that we all want to work together to expand the amount of workforce housing that is available. Okay, this plan isn't the end-all be-all. It's not perfect. There are pieces to it, as Adam said, that could probably never happen here, but the idea is that we all agree we have a workforce housing issue, and we do all want to work together to solve that, and we want to pursue some of these recommendations. Revisions to zoning and planning. So this is one that they're saying, this is another heavy lift. You've got to get each of your cities and your, what's the one in South Carolina, your PAC. You have to get the different bodies that are responsible for your zoning and planning laws to come back together and to really look at whether what they have in place is really promoting affordable workforce housing. Have we created things that just make it impossible to get to here? So they're recommending that we take a look at that needs to be a part of this conversation. We know that we have a lot of state zoning that we don't have any control of that makes this difficult as well. But they're saying, yes, it's a heavy lift. Go to the state and have those conversations. Push for these things. Employer-assisted housing. This is a suggestion they have that they have seen very successfully work in other places. So building here, the challenge is that when you build something, it's simply too expensive to sell or rent for what people can afford. That's the bottom line. So you have to find a way to fill that gap in the cost piece of it. So if you're $100,000 short of being able to rent it for what it's worth, you're losing money, you've got to find a way to plug a little bit more into that. And their suggestion was to take a look at employers as an example. Maybe there's an employer that owns property that could say, I'll put the property into this, so that the developer didn't have to pay the cost of that property and was able to develop something with maybe a 99-year lease that allowed the developer to have a return on investment, because that is fair and appropriate. No one is saying a developer should do it for free or that anyone should lose money. But somehow we have to fill that gap. And one of their recommendations was to work with employers to see if they have a resource they can put into there to help close that gap. Public-private partnerships, same concept. You can't build it and rent it or sell it and make any money. So how do we make it, put some resources in there? We can't make it less expensive enough to make it work, so we've got to insert additional resources. So public-private partnership, does the county have some land? Does one of the particular cities have some land? The Garibaldi Apartments are a public-private partnership that worked. My understanding is the city of Garibaldi said, we will defer your service development fees for those 5 years. You can pay them over 5 years instead of having to come up with all that money up front. And that was one of the key pieces, if I understand correctly, that made that possible for those apartments to be built. That's a public-private partnership. That's one where people come to the table and say, what do you have? What do I have? How can we make this financially work so we can get what we need built? So for our future, here's what we would hope for. That we would have a fluid supply of housing, allowing people to move around, that we would be able to have our values rise because people have the ability to move, they have enough money to improve, maintain, and improve the homes that they have, so that we can get this market unstuck and we can have the housing that people need, whether you're making the current 1025 minimum wage or whether you are a professional and you are making, you know, $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 a year. We want housing all across that spectrum, because definitely one of the things the study recognized was it's not just the lowest tiers of workforce that are struggling. It is an across the spectrum issue, okay? So that's what we hope to have. We hope to have 2 high-functioning markets. We're not saying stop the market on the coast that is driving the economy and has our second vacation homes. That's an important economy. The housing study in no way said or even suggested that that should be stopped. The housing study is saying we have to support the other market, the inland market, where our workforce is going to be, where our workforce needs to live, so that we can have a fully vibrant community. Okay? So we want 2 high-functioning markets. We don't want to take one down to bring one up. We want them to work together. Land value channeled into housing offsets. That's that. Who has some property? Can we put it into the deal so that we can make that deal work? Okay? We'd look to have the higher local wages, the higher standards, more options. We're always stuck with the low amount of land. That's not something that any of us have yet figured out how to manufacture. So that's kind of where that one sticks. Okay? I think that was, I can't remember where it ends.
Right there.
No, that's where it ends. So the full housing study is available. It's on the website at CARE. If you have any interest in that, www.careinc.org. It's also on the Economic Development Center. Woo!
That was Andre.
Economic Development Center's website.
And I'm going to do a presentation.
Oh, jeez.
And I'm going to maybe let you do the.
You want me to push the buttons? I can push the buttons.
Okay, is this
She's got one.
one thing I didn't ask earlier is if you have a cell phone, turn it off. I just, if not, turn it on. So I'm going to talk a little bit.